I never thought my life would become so complicated. My name is Alex, and I am a college student working on my thesis. It has been a challenging journey, filled with sleepless nights and stressful days. However, I had no idea that the real test would not be my academic workload, but rather an unexpected situation at home. It all started on a Friday night. After spending the whole week working late into the night to make progress on my thesis, I finally dragged myself home, utterly exhausted. The house was eerily quiet when I walked in, the soft light from the kitchen spilling into the hallway. "Alex, is that you?" My stepmother Sarah called out. "Yeah, it's me," I replied from the kitchen, my voice hoarse from fatigue. I stumbled into the kitchen to find Victoria at the stove, stirring something that smelled amazing. My father, Ryan, was sitting at the table reading the newspaper. "You look worn out," he said, glancing up over his glasses. I nodded, running a hand through my messy hair. "This thesis is kicking my butt." Victoria turned from the stove, concern etched on her face. "Have you been eating properly? You look pale." "I'm fine," I said, but my stomach growled loudly at that exact moment. Victoria laughed softly. "Sit down, dinner's almost ready." I shook my head. "Thanks, but I think I'm just gonna head to bed. I'm completely wiped out." "Are you sure?" she asked, her brow furrowed. "You really should eat something." "I'm sure," I replied, already backing out of the kitchen. "I just need sleep." "Well, good night, honey," she said. "Good night." I heard both of them call out as I climbed the stairs to my room. As soon as my head hit the pillow, I was out like a light. I'm not sure how long I slept, but eventually, I became vaguely aware of a presence in my room. In my half-conscious state, I thought it might just be a dream, but then I felt a soft touch on my hand, and my foggy mind struggled to comprehend what was happening. I felt my shirt being lifted slightly, and something cold brushed against my skin. It was such a shock that my body reacted instinctively, muscles tensing. But I was so tired, so desperate for sleep, that I couldn't bring myself to open my eyes or move. What happened next is something I'm still trying to make sense of. I felt a hand gently caressing me, in a way that was definitely not appropriate for a family member. My body responded, even as my mind reeled with confusion and disbelief. I wanted to speak up, to ask what was going on, but my exhaustion held me in place, unable to move or speak. Part of me wondered if this was just a strange, vivid dream, but it felt too real, too intense to be imagined. The touch continued, becoming more intimate. I felt a mix of panic, and to my shame, my body betrayed me, responding to the gentle caresses, even as my mind screamed that this was wrong. Just when I thought I couldn't take any more, when I was on the verge of forcing myself awake to confront what was happening, it stopped. I heard soft footsteps retreating, and then silence. I lay there, heart pounding, mind racing. What had just happened? Who had been in my room? I wanted to get up and investigate, but my body still felt heavy with exhaustion. Before I knew it, I had drifted back into a deep sleep. When I woke up the next morning, the events of the night seemed distant, like a hazy dream. Had it really happened? Or had my overworked mind conjured up some bizarre fantasy? I stumbled downstairs, still groggy and confused. The smell of coffee and bacon led me to the kitchen, where I found Victoria busy at the stove. "Good morning, sleepyhead," she greeted me with a smile. "You must have really needed that rest. How are you feeling?" I just stared at her, searching for any hint that something had changed between us, but she appeared completely normal, humming as she flipped pancakes on the griddle. "I'm fine," I said slowly. "Where's Dad?" "Oh, he had an early meeting with a client," Victoria replied, sliding a plate of food in front of me. "Eat up, you need your strength for all that studying." Despite her calm demeanor, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Victoria continued to bustle around the kitchen, chatting about her plans for the day, but I could barely hear her. My mind was stuck on the events of the previous night. Had they really happened? And if so, had it been Victoria who had come into my room? I couldn't bring myself to ask. The thought of accusing my stepmother of something so inappropriate made my stomach churn, so I said nothing. I finished my breakfast, thanked her, and headed back to my room to work on my thesis. But as I sat at my desk, staring at my laptop screen, I couldn't concentrate. The memory of those touches, real or imagined, kept intruding on my thoughts. I spent the next few days in a fog, trying to balance my thesis work with the confusing emotions swirling inside me. Every time I saw Sarah, I felt a mix of embarrassment, curiosity, and guilt. She, on the other hand, acted as though nothing had happened. It wasn't until the following Friday that everything came to a head. I had gotten out of class early and rushed home to work on my thesis defense, which was scheduled for the next day. I was so focused on my work that I didn't hear Victoria enter my room. "Alex?" Her voice startled me. "Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. I brought you some snacks. You've been working so hard." I turned to face her, my heart racing. She was standing there with a plate of cookies, smiling at me just like always. But something in her eyes seemed different. Was I just imagining it? "Thanks," I managed to say, taking the plate from her. Instead of leaving, Victoria perched on the edge of my bed. "How's the thesis coming along?" "It's okay," I replied, trying to stay composed. "I'm just really worried about the defense tomorrow." Her face softened with sympathy. "Oh, honey, you're going to do great. You've worked so hard." Before I knew it, she had moved closer, her hand resting on my shoulder. The touch sent a jolt through me, reminding me of that night. I couldn't bear it any longer. I needed to know. "Sarah," I said, my voice trembling, "was that you in my room last week?" As soon as the words escaped my lips, I saw the change in her expression. Her warm smile faltered, replaced by a look of surprise, then guilt. "Alex," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I don't know what to say." In that instant, I knew it hadn't been a nightmare. It had really happened. My stepmother had entered my room that night and crossed a line, doing something that broke every boundary. A small, ashamed part of me felt a strange curiosity. "We need to talk about this," Victoria finally said, breaking the silence. She nodded, her eyes brimming with unshed tears. "We do, but not now. Your father will be home soon, and you need to focus on your thesis defense. Can we talk after that?" I wanted to argue, demand answers immediately, but she was right. I couldn't let this derail me when my entire academic future was at stake. "Okay," I agreed, reluctantly. "Tomorrow." Victoria stood up, smoothing her skirt. "I'm sorry, Alex," she said, her hands trembling. "I never meant for this to happen. I'll explain everything tomorrow, I promise." She left the room, and I returned to my computer, my mind racing. How was I supposed to concentrate on my thesis now? How could I face my father at dinner, knowing what I now knew? But I had to try. I'd worked too hard for too long to let this unravel everything. So I took a deep breath, pushed all thoughts of Victoria and that night to the back of my mind, and dove back into my work. Little did I know, this was just the beginning of a complex and emotional journey that would test the limits of family, love, and morality. As I sat there, trying to focus on academic theories and research methodologies, I had no idea how much my life was about to change. Tomorrow would bring answers. But would I be ready? Would I be strong enough? The morning of my thesis defense arrived, filled with a mixture of anticipation and dread. On one hand, I was eager to present the work I'd poured my heart and soul into for months. On the other, I couldn't shake the anxiety about the conversation waiting for me at home. I barely tasted the breakfast Victoria had prepared for me, my stomach in knots. She moved around the kitchen with forced cheerfulness, but I could see the tension in her. If only she knew the turmoil brewing beneath our seemingly normal family breakfast. The defense itself passed in a blur. I presented my research, answered questions, and defended my conclusions. By some miracle, I managed to keep my personal issues from affecting my performance. When it was over, my advisor congratulated me with a broad smile. "Excellent work, Alex. You should be proud." I should have been elated, but instead, all I felt was a sense of impending dread as I made my way home. Victoria was waiting for me when I arrived, sitting at the kitchen table with 2 mugs of steaming coffee in front of her. She looked up as I entered, her face a mask of anxiety and regret. "How did it go?" she asked softly. "Fine," I replied, my voice tight. "Past that." "That's wonderful, Alex. I knew you would." I cut her off, unable to keep up the pretense of normality any longer. "We need to talk about what happened." Victoria nodded, her shoulders sagging. "You're right. Please, sit down." I sat across from her, wrapping my hands around the warm mug she had prepared for me. For a long time, neither of us spoke. Finally, I broke the heavy silence. "Why did you come into my room that night?" I asked. Victoria closed her eyes and took a deep breath before meeting my gaze. I don't have a good answer, Alex. I've been asking myself the same question since it happened, and I've tried to understand it. She paused, her fingers tracing the rim of her mug. The truth is, I've been struggling for a while. Your father is a good man, but he's been so distant lately, always working, and I felt lonely and unappreciated. I was overwhelmed, confused, and I let my emotions take over. Victoria continued, her voice barely a whisper. That night, I had a little too much wine. I was feeling reckless, and when I saw your light on, I thought we could talk. But when I reached your room, you were already asleep. She paused, taking a shaky breath. I'm not sure what happened next. You looked so peaceful, and before I knew it, well, you know what happened. I sat there, trying to process her words. Part of me wanted to be angry, to lash out at her for violating my trust and privacy. But another part of me saw the pain in her eyes, the real regret in her words. I'm so sorry, Alex, she said, tears streaming down her face. What I did was wrong. I betrayed your trust and your father's. If you want me to leave, I'll understand. The thought of her leaving, of our family falling apart, hit me like a punch in the gut. Despite everything, I realized I didn't want her to go. I don't want you to leave, I said slowly, but I don't know how to move forward. How can I trust you after this? Victoria looked at me, hope and fear battling in her eyes. I don't know, she said softly, but I'd like to try. If you're willing, I'll do whatever it takes to make this right. We talked for hours, laying everything on the table. Victoria shared more about her feelings of loneliness and neglect in her marriage, and I opened up about my own insecurities and the confusing mix of emotions her actions had stirred in me. As the afternoon wore on, I found myself feeling an unexpected closeness to my stepmother, not in the inappropriate way of that night, but in a way I'd never experienced before. For the first time, I felt like I truly understood her, and she, me. But as the conversation wound down, one question remained. What will we tell Dad? As our conversation wound down, Sarah's face reflected her inner conflict. I don't know, she began. Part of me believes he deserves to know the truth, but another part is terrified of the consequences for our family. She nodded, looking utterly miserable. I love your father, Alex, despite everything. But the idea of hurting him this way, her voice trailed off. And I could understand her dilemma all too well. Our secret felt like an unseen weight between us, pressing down on everything. Maybe, I said slowly. We don't need to tell him everything, but we should address the core issues, your feelings of neglect, the distance between you two. Victoria paused, a flicker of hope appearing in her eyes. You think that would be enough? I don't know, I admitted, but maybe it could help prevent something like this from happening again. We agreed to take things one day at a time. Victoria would work on communicating better with my dad, and I would concentrate on finishing my college assignments. We both promised to be more open with one another and to talk through any feelings or problems that arose. As Victoria began to prepare dinner that evening, she paused, looking at me with a mix of gratitude and lingering guilt. Thank you, Alex, for listening. I replied honestly, I don't hate you. I'm still processing everything, but I don't hate you. She nodded, offering me a watery smile before turning to the stove. Later that night, as I lay in bed, my mind replayed our conversation. I felt a strange mix of emotional relief from having cleared the air, confusion about my own feelings, and a deeper understanding of the complexities of adult relationships. Yet, there was also a nagging sense of guilt for agreeing to keep part of the truth hidden, something I shouldn't have. These thoughts troubled me as I drifted into an uneasy sleep. The following weeks felt like a strange balancing act, trying to maintain a sense of normalcy while navigating our new reality. Victoria and I were hyper-aware of each other, careful to avoid being alone for too long, maintaining a respectful distance. I threw myself into my schoolwork, using it as a distraction from the turmoil at home. True to her word, Sarah made efforts to reconnect with my father. One day, I returned from class to find Victoria alone at the house. She was curled up on the couch with a book. I didn't expect you to be home so early, she said, startled by my arrival. The professor canceled class, I explained, hovering awkwardly by the doorway. Where's Dad? Working late again, she replied, frustration creeping into her voice, and I noticed her shoulders slump. Without thinking, I sat beside her on the couch. Are things not going well? I asked hesitantly. Victoria gave me a sad smile. I'm trying, Alex. I really am, but sometimes I wonder if it's enough, or if we've gone too far. Despite everything, I felt a pang of sympathy for her. She was genuinely trying to make things work. I'm sorry, I said, reaching for her hand for comfort. The moment our skin touched, a jolt of electricity surged through me. Our eyes met, and the air between us seemed charged with an intensity that terrified me. Victoria must have felt it too, because she quickly pulled her hand away. I should start dinner, she said, her voice trembling as she rushed to the kitchen. I sat there, heart racing. What was that? Why did I react that way to such a simple touch? I retreated to my room, my mind a whirl of confusion. I thought we had moved on, that we'd put that night behind us. But clearly, there were still unresolved feelings, and a dangerous attraction simmering beneath the surface. That night, I lay awake for hours, wrestling with my conscience. What I was feeling was wrong. Victoria was my stepmother, my father's wife. Yet I couldn't deny the pull I felt towards her, the way my body responded to her presence. I thought about my dad, oblivious to everything happening under his own roof. I thought about Victoria, trapped in a marriage that was slowly disintegrating. And I thought about myself, caught in the middle, trying to navigate feelings and situations I wasn't ready for. As dawn broke, I made a decision. I couldn't continue living like this, walking on eggshells in my own home, constantly battling these inappropriate feelings. Something had to change. With a heavy heart, I began packing a bag. Maybe some time away, some distance from the whole situation, would help clear my head. I could stay with a friend for a while, focusing on finishing my last few classes. As I zipped up my backpack, I heard movement in the hallway. Victoria was up, probably starting her morning routine. I took a deep breath, bracing myself for the conversation ahead. I needed to tell her I was leaving and explain why. It wasn't going to be easy, but it was necessary. With one last glance around my room, I opened the door, ready to face whatever came next. Little did I know, the most difficult part of this whole ordeal was still to come. As I stepped into the hallway, backpack slung over my shoulder, I almost collided with Sarah. She was on her way to the kitchen, still in her robe, her hair tousled from sleep. Her eyes widened as she saw my packed bag and the determined set of my jaw. Alex, she asked, her voice tight with concern. What's going on? I took a deep breath, preparing for the conversation ahead. I'm leaving, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. I think it's best if I stay with a friend for a while. Sarah's face fell, a mixture of understanding and disappointment washing over her. Alex, she sighed, is this because of yesterday? Because of us? I nodded, but couldn't bring myself to meet her eyes. It's not just yesterday. It's everything. I can't keep pretending everything's normal when it isn't, and I need space to figure things out. She reached out as if to touch my arm, but thought better of it, her hand falling to her side. I understand, she said softly, but could we please talk about it first? Your father will be devastated if you just leave without saying anything. In my haste to leave, I hadn't considered how my sudden departure would affect my father.